It's 7:33. I'm calling to order the meeting of the F&B, RTM F&B meeting. I just want to make sure there's a couple of minor changes on the agenda. I requested a little bit late, somebody from the Board of Ed to attend our meeting to discuss the teacher's contract. Nobody could make it, but we also have a meeting next Wednesday, which is a two-part meeting. So at 7:30 to 8, we're going to be in a Zoom meeting with Public Health and Safety so that we can go into executive session to discuss the police contract. And then Kate will be joining us for that. And we will be leaving then at 8 o'clock to have a joint meeting with the RTM Education Committee and members of the Board of Ed and administration to discuss the teacher's contract. Now, they also perceive that they want to have a budget discussion there, but we still would have to still vote on the police union contract first because we'll be out of executive session. And I'm open for everybody else's input. While I understand it makes it easier for the Board of Ed to discuss the budget with both committees there, I personally believe that our focus is different than the Education Committee, and I don't want to be tied up for an hour on their questions, which may be different from ours. So that's just my opinion. But if the rest of the committee has no problem with doing joint meeting, then that's what we'll do. So open for that discussion from everyone.
Wednesday at 8 o'clock approximately, correct?
It starts at 8 o'clock, yeah.
Okay.
That's after we've already had a meeting.
For half an hour. Yeah. Right.
Do we have to vote on the police contract that night?
Yes. We can't vote tonight. We can vote.
Well, I mean, after the
18th, we have to vote on the police contract. We're secondary on it, and we have to vote on the teacher contract. So those are the two things that we will be reporting on. But the focus of today's meeting is to get everybody's input on the budget, because on Tuesday, the Board of Ed expects the RTM Finance and Budget report on questions and comments on the superintendent's proposed budgets. Education will be doing it, and I believe the Finance and Budget Committee will also be reporting that night on their comments. So that's really what the real focus of this meeting was today, was to deal with their budget and also just cover a couple of other little things. I'll cover the first one real quick so we can just check some things off.
Jack, what do you think? I mean, these guys were working on a budget for 3 months already, and they give us a week to respond?
A little tricky turnaround.
Well,
1 week?
Yep.
Well,
I agree with that. We've usually tried to push it back a little bit, but I don't know that that's going to happen. I've had conversations with both Beth and with Jenny on this budget, and I think there's 3 areas that we want to focus on. Some of it's been sort of mentioned a little bit here, mentioned a little bit there by board members, but I don't know that the first part is going to be a kumbaya conversation. How's that? Does that sort of say it the right way, Jenny? It's basically going to say that they don't do their business the way they're supposed to be doing business.
It's not the way I would approach it. So it's leaving me, yeah, a week is not a lot of time to digest this. And I went to Super Duper Fun Saturday too. So we'll to more discussion later. When
Well,
hear
how
what
do we
everybody
make
else
it
has to say.
longer? How do we give ourselves more time?
Well, the way I look at it is that we can give them feedback within a week, but that doesn't mean that's the end of the feedback.
Do we have to vote next on at this time, or even next year? Report is different than voting.
Right.
We want to make sure that we have a consensus on what we're going to be delivering. So nobody can challenge that this is just Jack's opinion or just Peter's opinion or Beth's or Jenny's or Barry's opinion. We wanted to say in general, here's the thought and the approach that we're doing.
I'm all for consensus. I agree. I think it's important to have.
I think we need more time.
But we're going to have more time. But
I think we tell them on Tuesday we need more time. I don't know. I think we tell them now so they don't have to set their expectations.
I can say this is only our preliminary conversation with you. Here's the information we're requesting.
But we might request more.
Absolutely.
Especially since our next meeting is about the police contract, and then there's just a lot of other things going on that otherwise we have to squeeze another meeting in somehow. I don't know.
Well, yeah,
I
they
can't
originally
have this talk and half an hour talk next time and say, "Oh, we like your budget."
Yeah, well, yeah. We ended up on the 18th only because
Sorry.
because I actually said we're meeting tonight. We're meeting on the 18th, and I just wouldn't get a quorum if I also said, by the way, we're also meeting on the 19th. I'm sorry. So that's part one. Part two is that when we're meeting on the 18th, I think I want to manage the expectations of the Board of Ed as well as the Education Committee, saying that the meeting on the 18th is to solely discuss the teacher's contract. We're not going to have our preliminary conversation with you as well as the board of the RTM Education Committee on the budget itself. We're giving you our preliminary thoughts that Tuesday. Digest them. And we reserve the right to request additional information throughout the budget process up until May 9th when we vote. So, but so if everybody's okay, I have no problems delivering that message to the Board of Ed.
I think that's fair because it is a large budget and with a lot of complexity. And even once you've done, watched the Super Saturday videos and read through the budget, there is a lot to think about, and to consolidate it into this amount of time makes it, our comments can't be fully thought through in such a short period of time.
I'll be honest, I watched the meeting most of last night or into the early morning and this morning, and I have some clear ideas about it, but I'm sure after discussing we'll have more.
Well, I also think as a group, when we bring things, highlight things, we come together we all present viewpoints and we come together and things get explained or emphasized. And I think we need that time to talk to each other.
So
I agree.
I agree as well. I do want to say that I have and had this conversation with Jenny and Beth. Peter, you were at work, so the uh, the I think that there's three areas that we want to hit on, and actually had this conversation with Jen Chinesky a little bit earlier today on something else because I was talking budget, overall budget for the town side, and I just asked her some questions. We've heard in budget meetings, David Brown mentions it frequently, that they don't get presentations. But there's something else that happens. What happens is that when they make a decision, they're only doing it with a very narrow focus of what it is today, not what it is tomorrow, the next year, and the next year afterwards. So they start with something that's a little pebble coming down the hill, but by the time you get 3 years out, we're at an avalanche. And I'll give you perfect examples of this. So, very important if you look at their goals, the social emotional well-being of students. So we've been adding people. All of a sudden there's an epiphany. I have no other way to do it, but not 2 years ago, but now with adding all these bodies, there's an epiphany that we need a director of mental health. Was that not thought of when we first started this area? Was it not thought of that we were going to need somebody? There's another person coordinating something else. Then we have various programs out there. Not questioning this of the individual programs, not saying that social emotional is a bad thing to have. But there's no, here's where we're starting, here's where we expect to be. There's no part of that in their discussion of their strategic plans or their goals. And goals have financial impact. The other one that came out, they took a grant from the Darien Foundation for 2 years, and now it's 170 for a robotics group. Did you not understand that when you accepted this, that it was going to have a significant impact on your budget down the road? And the other one that we were talking about is last year they decided to start teaching Mandarin in the 6th grade, 0.2 an FTE. This year they're adding another 0.2 FTE because those 6th graders are 7th graders, but there's new 6th graders that you're going to be teaching. And I guarantee next year there's going to be another 0.2 because the original 6th graders who were 7th graders are now 8th graders. The 6th graders are 7th graders, and we have new 6th graders going in. And by the way, when they become a freshman, they may be already up to Mandarin 3. So do we end up with Mandarin 5 or Mandarin AP? Now, there's some minor discussion that, well, we should see a reduction. We should see a reduction in Spanish or French down the road. So where is it on the chart? Tell me when that FTE is coming. Don't give me this mamby-pamby, someplace in the sky over the rainbow business thing that, oh, that's going to offset it. They never had something that explained the full impact of that. 2 staff members were paid for by the ESSER grant. Pretty expensive. ESSER grant ran out. Those are 2 of the bodies that they're adding this year. In every business I've been in, if I was going to initiate something, I better have a 3 to 5 year pro forma of what that impact's going to be. Otherwise, you're making a decision without the full story. and chapter and verse of things that are going on with these little pebbles that come down here and are creating avalanches and avalanches, which is part of the reason we have a 5% increase in the budget. And, you know, I've heard it from Duke, even mentioned it. We have 3 new schools that are going to be built. We had to add a custodian for Ox Ridge, which we knew. And Duke finally said, are we going to have to add a custodian in each of those 3 schools when they come online? Nobody's discussed that. There's some other issues along those type of lines that I asked them to take all their grants that they're receiving. Here's the proposed budget. Here's all the grants that are in that dependent area. Here's the FTEs associated with those grants. Here's what it really costs to run the school. Because if we lose all those grants, especially some of the federal ones, those 10 to 20 bodies aren't going away. So that really gives an indication of what's going on. If you're getting a grant for a program or something else, you're having new software. That type of analysis goes on the town side. They, you know, back when Kate took over as town administrator, she was very specific that nobody was going to sign on new software unless she understood what the maintenance cost was, because ultimately you could get a grant for something, but that maintenance cost is adding to her budget. And so that's the first thing we want to talk to them about. That they're not doing business and they're not doing a thorough analysis, and goals are just not a piece of words on a document. It has financial impact, and they're not doing financial analysis on those goals. And they're not thinking ahead either. I mean, how do you not think that if I'm adding all these bodies, I have that? And Dennis Maroney even asked, I'm not sure that we have the right org chart here for this mental health initiative, that where the people, so that appears to be not thought out. And again,
I think Denny said there was no org chart at all.
Yeah, well, yeah, I was being kind.
So Jack, remember years ago, Martha Banks said, when any capital project is being proposed, we want to see the long-term impact, right?
Yep.
So now if he said, okay, you guys want to hire more people, give us an analysis how much this is going to cost us in the long run. Is that reasonable?
And
I
what
think it is.
additional and what additional FTEs you need to you perceive you're going to add to meet this goal?
Right, we had a form that they had to fill out for capital expenditures, and now they may have to fill out a form for hiring additional people. And you know what? At least it makes them think about it. Because
Well,
in
yeah.
the long run, it's
The
expensive.
whole there's also like I mean, maybe this new director of mental health will bring it all together, but there's money being spent to increase. There's a wellness center, and they're
Mhm.
connecting with kids in crisis, and it all sounds really good, but like, how does it fit into our, all the psychiatrists or psychologists, whatever, that are at the schools and the work that they do? Like, I don't understand. It seems like there's a lot of, and there's no like big picture on how the kids are going to work and the people are going to all work together. I don't really,
There were board members who asked the same question.
I mean, that was just one thing that I haven't watched the Saturday, but I've looked through a good bit of the budget, and those are the things that jumped out at me. Like, well, okay, some of these things are really nice. I don't necessarily have a problem with the concept of them, but I don't know.
Well, and particularly, oh, I'm sorry, Jenny, you want to
No,
go?
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, particularly with the mental health stuff, it seems like a lot of it has been like developed sort of in crisis.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
oh dear Lord, we really need to do something, so we're going to do this. And it's just a bunch of haphazard chunks instead of a like holistically thought out plan.
Yes. That is
Well,
what my vision has seen. I don't,
Yeah.
and
I
I'm all
agree.
for wellness and helping, fixing, but not because someone knows somebody over here, so we're going to get this organization involved, and somebody over here knows this, but we got to pay this person for half a day's work and that one for 3 days worth of work, and then we've got psychologists in every school that should be educated to work with these peoples and organizations anyway. So I'm not quite sure.
Iris,
Anyway,
I agree with you. I think to be to be fair, a lot of what was done has evolved during a crisis situation, and remember, not that long ago there were 4 psychologists that were proposed, there were 4 new FTEs, and there was a lot of anxiety about that. But thank goodness we said yes to that, and we got that in there. So I look at this as being, I don't want to use the word remedial, but I look at this as being something that is, they're trying to get a handle on it. And again, things that Jack mentioned and you mentioned were mentioned by more than one board member. I think I don't know who it was, Jack, but somebody did ask for a flow chart so they could deal with this issue.
Well, and that I do want to take a step back. First of all, I like the humor that there was anxiety adding psychologists. Just a little pun there. But the it's not that we're questioning what this goal is. We're questioning that there is no forecast, there's no thought process on. So here's what we have today. What is this going to look like in 3 years? What is Mandarin going to look like in 3 years? When do we see that FTE stand? Put a stake in the ground, administration. What's going on with robotics? What other grants do you have sitting out there that we don't know about that you're doing? How many other things are we hearing that David Brown has said? Well, we haven't had a presentation on that, and they're saying, well, we can add it to the February or March board. Well, wait, you've already voted on the budget that's spending this. That should be
Yeah.
unacceptable to the board.
The thing that when I was combing through the budget book, the thing that stuck out at me is the strategic plan is in there, and to your point, Jack, and if everyone has a chance to look through it, there's no numbers in there. So when they're talking about their initiatives, and I'm not disputing their policy decisions either. I don't see any thought process around where they think the trajectory of these initiatives are going to go and what are the funding needs for them. And like, I pointed out to Jack, you take Fitch Academy, which I know is getting a rent increase because they're expanding a space. But aside from that program is, that's a just like, what is that? That's
20%, you said?
yeah, it's almost 40%, including the space increase in 3 years, not in 10 years, in 3 years.
and they're
And,
also
I'm a big fan of Fitch
negotiating
Academy,
the
but
lease.
no, so the lease is only part of it. If you just took out
But if you're expanding space now and your lease doesn't get renegotiated, what do you do going forward? Do you have
well, just forget the lease, just the the personnel piece of it's up 30% in 3 years. And that, yes, they're going to get a few more 100 square feet or 1,000 square feet to accommodate, but I don't see any discussion of like, here's what's happening with Fitch Academy. This is where it's growing. This is why we need the space. As far as I can tell, enrollment hasn't changed.
Well, here's
So,
the other part that I'm keep on emphasizing. I don't care about the rationale for why Fitch Academy needs it this year. Where's Fitch Academy going to be for fiscal year 25, 26, and 27?
that's what I mean. It's like,
yeah.
okay,
I want to understand that. Where do you think the
where's it
enrollment's
going?
Where
Right,
do you think other things are happening? So,
right.
I mean, that's what we're complaining about. We're not saying that Fitch Academy is a bad idea. It has
No,
saved
not at
us
all.
money.
No.
We'll never be able to quantify it. But when I add Fitch Academy and what you anticipate is going there, if I add Mandarin, if I add robotics, if I add that you're adding other staff on other ESSER grants that are going to release, if I add the fact that we're adding staff to the social and emotional, oh, and this is just humor, all right? We're not going to raise the security guards, but I have had a conversation with Duke and Adley that I think that in the next 2 years they may need to add another rover, and my rationale for that is I went to my grandson's 4-year-old birthday party at Chelsea Pears with a bunch of kids sneezing and coughing on a Saturday. On Sunday, I was at another affair for Hanukkah with all these other kids running around. On that Monday, I went to a RTM meeting with 120 of my nearest and dearest friends. And by Wednesday, I had a cold. And
Shocking.
I had to fight that off until I finally got some antibiotics. I didn't have COVID. To get some antibiotics, and I spoke to my young general practitioner, who's very nice, saying, "Can you give me some antibiotics so I can spend the holidays with my grandchildren so I can catch another cold?" These people are going to be very similar to my age, not as old as I am, but in their late 50s, 60s. Most of their kids are out of the house. If they're walking around the school, unless they're wearing masks, there's going to be a heck of a lot of sick days until they build up immunity to being in that school. And so they may
And
be
therefore
down to,
put that in the forecast, right?
yeah, put that in. I mean,
Yeah.
that's fine. And it's not that we want to talk about security or anything, but the fact of the matter is that then when you're presenting this budget, you should be able to also say, based upon these initiatives, here's what we perceive we're adding in the next 3 years, because they may be at 5% already in the next 3 years. And
And that the
and
Fitch
they'll blame
Academy
it on
thing
the
is neat.
teacher's contract, and it's not the teacher's contract.
Right. Iris, that was just an example of like we've had tremendous growth there in expenses. I'm not disputing it. I'm just saying, well, is that the trajectory? Can we expect 10% per year for growth
I'm not
if that's the case,
qualified
it's
to
going to
make.
get to $1 million pretty quickly.
I'm not qualified to make whether these are good, bad, or ugly decisions for us. I mean,
No, but we
obviously,
just
I have
need to know what
opinions,
they
but I want to know what the financial cost of this is, and
right.
have we, we don't ever seem to unwind anything either. Like like they're going to add in some, like, I don't know, is there a half of an FTE or something for to teach ASL?
Yeah.
And so will they have measurements on how many kids show up to take that? So then do you let that person go next year if nobody takes it? And so will we see a reduction in staff, or will we add more because more people are going to take sign language versus Mandarin? It's a
And
number thing. It's not whether that's a good decision or a bad decision.
Now let's go back to the mental health crisis, which we all agree does exist. The point is not so much how we overall address it and assess it. It is what can the school system do, and what can parents be expected to cover under their own health insurance? Because if you say the town will have to take all of this on, it's going to be overbearing. And there's no reason for that. People live in Darien, they're wealthy, and they have insurance. And if this is what it's all about, that the school system provides services because the parents think it's too expensive for them, that is not the answer. The families have to take their own responsibilities within their own financial means. And then comes the school system. And I don't hear that at all when, the mental health crisis is mentioned in the school system. It's all about how much money can we get anywhere as quickly as possible.
But Bert, I'm going to add to that because the first part of, I think, our report has to be on the fact that you're not projecting out what the end result is going to be, how this is going to grow, what's the real cost to this, what's the end result, and if there are certain things that if this happens and that, then that should be there. And then what's the total on your existing budget? If you plug this out, all right, and what's the impact? What's the projections and what's your vision of where this ends up? I mean, the simple thing is Mandarin. I don't want to get into a discussion of whether or not um, social emotional is a good thing. I will get into discussion that there doesn't seem to be an org chart, there doesn't seem to be matrix, there doesn't seem to be defined roles, there seems to be little pot shots that are over here instead of an orchestrated approach of how we're handling it. And I don't want to hear, well, the director of mental health is going to do all this. Then you shouldn't bring on any program until they have a time to do their job. I mean, it's really that simple because once you commit to something, the expectation is that next year that's still there, or you have to find a replacement for it, as opposed to understanding how it integrates into the total. But Mandarin's the perfect example. The 0.2, then another 0.2, then another 0.2, then and then where do we end up in high school? Are we ending up with 4 or 5 additional teachers? And we're not saying Mandarin's a bad idea, but let's at least understand what the full impact is over the next 3 to 5 years.
Can we ask also to understand where we're going? It also is helpful to know where we've been. We're adding 17 FTEs, right? It's the 9 plus the new 8. Can we ask to see how many FTEs we've added over the past 3 to 5 years, just to understand the growth, the comparison of like how we're growing and what areas we're growing, and is that going to translate into the projections for the next 5 years? Because we've grown a tremendous amount in our in the FT side and other areas of the budget. So I almost would love to see a little more color on, particularly on the FTEs, where we've been.
I think that's one of our requested information. We'd like a last 3 years, including the partial year this year, and what you're proposing next year for your FTEs and what category, because
and 3 to 5 years from now.
And where you think you're going with this, based upon where your goal is, where you think you're going. Because also fair. Switches, because I never get this right. Was it in the elementary schools we had like an SID something or other? People, I forget what the acronym was, but we moved them to administrators. So by doing that, you have a certain professional staff, but now you've moved in administrators and you can have the reduction on the other side. But what's the total there? I wouldn't doubt that if we really look at some of these roles and everything, we added somebody to work on computers in the middle school last year. They've added probably in the neighborhood of 30 plus people over the last couple of years, 3 years. And that's really starting to say, how did you not know this when you were doing this? So that's sort of the first part. So number one, yes, we're going to ask for that in our third part of the report. So the first part is talking about um, what we're seeing with the failure to forecast and projection of where you're going to end up. So it's not just what your goals are for here, but what that goal does over the next 3 to 5 years. And what are the financial impacts to that? What are the FTEs to that? What is the organization to that? Because we just don't believe that it's done in an organized manner or in a business manner. That's number one. The second part is policy. Look, it's their board, and I did say at one time during the meeting that I don't pretend to tell a board about their policy. And Duke said, "But you're going to." I said, "I don't tell a board how to run their meetings and their policy." And he said, "But you're going to." And I said, "Yes." I said, "Can you have this whole conversation of SSOs and where they're going to be during the year and whether or not they're in lunchrooms and do that in executive session and just come back to us and tell us you resolved it? We don't need, after all this secrecy, we don't need to be explaining to the world where these guys are going to be at every minute of the day." So I saw Adley nod at that, but I think there's other policies. Like, why are you voting for something that you're locking into if you haven't had the full presentation to it? The answer is take it out of the budget. Because otherwise we just started another pebble going down the road. And you have too many questions that aren't going to be answered during a budget, and yet we've locked in again. So that's the second part, is talking about policy. That gets to the overall budget. I personally believe that a 5% increase. Oh, I'm sorry. I want to go to something else in the second part. Dr. Adley did this whole analysis where they analyzed what they gave back to the town. And it came out that the average over the last 10 years was $400,000, which means there's no fluff in their budget because they spent 99.7% of what their original budget was. Well, his math is right. His concept is extremely flawed. And even John Cini called him out on that. The fact of the matter is that there were times when they pre-bought things, they moved things out of certain accounts, and they did other initiatives during the course of the year. So the only reason is they spent all their money, whether or not it was originally in the budget or not in the budget. That doesn't mean that they budgeted well. That means that they know how to spend money. There's a difference there. All right. And part of the reason why they know how to spend money is for those who, maybe it's a show of hand, who was around when Taylor was part of our group? I know, Iris, you were. Peter. Beth, were you part when Taylor was still on our committee? Taylor Carter? Remember Taylor did this whole analysis and she used to call it fluff, and I kept on calling it flexibility. I'm almost saying, okay, Taylor, I owe you an apology. Yeah, they don't come often. But I think she's right. Certain areas, I think 5% is outrageous, but there's certain things that I believe they can do to reduce that amount. There's been discussion in the past about eliminating budget control for those 3 teachers, that in case of class breaks. I don't think it should be in the budget. No other town has that. And if in fact they need people at the end of the year, come back to the RTM and the Board of Finance. Jim Palin has stated, and I don't mean to speak to him, that he will support it. We've said if you need money for normal business, we'll support it. So you don't need those 3 that you don't use often, and then you spend it on other things during the course of the year. In the past, they've pre-bought technology, and even with what they're spending on the security officers and other things like that, they still may be coming in with between $300,000 to $500,000 of extra funds. So I had a quick discussion with John Cini, Duke, and Rich Rudel saying, hey, figure out what you're going to have, commit to pre-buying some of the technology that you already have on that list. So if you're going to pre-buy the technology, which we know you're going to buy it and reduce your budget by $300,000. Because that way, your existing amount that we taxed our citizens for isn't going into the general fund. It's going to reduce their taxes for next year. So that's one of the concepts. This year, across the school nation, and so that's one of the things that we are going to ask. You had a technology budget last year. You indicated that you were going to buy X number of machines for X number of dollars. Can you give us a report on what you did buy and how much you spent and what the actual cost was for those machines? Because I think there might have been some flexibility there. This year, more than anything else, it always happened in the past, but now even more than ever, education is very similar to police department, truck drivers, and auto mechanics. There's not enough people to service right now. And so there's vacancies across the nation, across the state, across our district, and across our DIRG. And that's part of the reason why they're offering more money for substitutes. I think that this year, and I had a conversation with Marge, and she said, I've never seen this before, but yes, it's very hard to get people. And I know that Darien will not put in bodies, they will only put in qualified people. The same way we have a turnover ratio, I'd like to see a vacancy ratio in their budget. And that you're spending 60 million on total salaries. It's probably more than that. But 25 or 50 basis points of that is 300,000. Put it in your budget to reduce your budget. If you end up that you're fully occupied and you don't do it, and so you need money, come back to us at the end of the year. But having that amount that I'm budgeting for the spots, and I'm then going to have vacancies that frees up extra money during the course of the year, to me is no longer acceptable.
This new contract with paying more money is supposed to eliminate some of that. Because some substitutes are because of the turnover, and so we're paying better. Our turnover should go down, blah, blah, blah. So, like, I had a lot of questions on the teacher contract that related to the budget. In this same line of thought, is there some things that seem to be in the budget that don't seem to take into account the rationale for the new teacher's contract?
We will have, and they did estimate turnover. I believe they mentioned that the turnover was estimated. I thought I may be wrong, so I'm making up numbers here. Don't quote me on this.
$600,000.
Right. But they said that at the end of the day, they were anticipating, I thought it was like 50 people net, because they looked at what their turnover was last year. How many people did they have to pay at a higher grade to replace that person? And it came out net to be about the result of 50, which is how they came up with the 600,000, anticipating that some of the people that will leave naturally will be able to replace at a lower level. Other people will be able to replace at a higher, and so that's how they accounted it in the math on that. but we can ask for them to reiterate that. But Duke said, well, in the turnover, we end up picking up other costs. But right now, even the consulting companies are having difficulty finding staff to supplement us. And quite honestly, if we're putting in subs in there, they don't cost what a teacher does. And to really explain, Beth or Peter, correct me on what this is called. It's like the teacher in waiting program that we had, where we hired two. We had two go through it this year, and we were hiring both of them. It appears we couldn't even get to people to come into our district to participate in that program this year. So for this next budget year, they're dropping it. They'll bring it back later, but it's a staffing issue. So I'd like to see us do vacancy. I'd like them to give us an accounting of how much money was in vacancies over the last 3 years, including this year. Because I think you're going to find that does add tremendous flexibility to it. Next thing on the budget, from my perspective, and we need to validate this, without question, Duke raised on the robotics the elimination of $10,000 for some iPads, saying there's enough iPads in this town that you should not need to buy them. The other thing he questioned, and I'll leave that up to the board, but we'll support it, is that the professional development for the robotics course was more than the high school and middle school for the teachers added together. So that's something that will be taken and reviewed by them and should be reduced. But one of the other things was they calculate that every one of our sports teams are going to go to tourneys, and hence they need buses. Now, there are some programs like swimming that does go to every tournament that's going on, but we know that we really shouldn't have every team having a bus in the budget for sports for tournaments as if they're going all the way through the states. That seems a little excessive.
But we have the best sports teams in the state.
Yeah, yes, and it's just like Lake Wobegon, and all of our children are above average. But the fact of the matter is, I had some that weren't. I had some that did graduate very high in the class. Also, so I mean, it just matters which kid it was. I mean, just a little aside, my younger daughter was the first girl in Darien to win 3 FCAC and state championships in 3 different sports, to be followed by virtually all of her friends who did it in different sports. But lacrosse, field hockey, indoor track, outdoor track, volleyball were the ones that the girls were going through. So there's about 10 or 15 women who have done that. So yes, we have good stock here in our sports teams, but it's an excessive budget amount that may generate some more money. Are there other things that Jenny, you had a couple other than Fitch that you want to throw into the hopper now for us to put together?
Nothing that I could think of that is obvious to reduce in order to get it down from 5%. I mean, you identified things that you thought was pretty easy to, go after and look harder and see if they can be reduced. I'm still digesting, it's all the growth, in the summary page. I'm looking more at the growth areas of anything in there that could be postponed, right? Or funded different ways, but I can't identify. I'm not there yet to focus in on anything else that you haven't already focused in on. My problem is the where we've come from and where we're going. This budget's really growing. It's just really
Yeah.
growing, and I struggle with everything is justifiable, right? I read this beautiful report year after year, and there's always a good explanation as to why you need it, and yes, but at the end of the day, how is the academic experience? Um, are we that much better? And yeah, school safety, I understand that whole rationale, but at the same time, it's in the category of you can have anything you want, but you really can't have everything you want. What's gonna give and take here? And I don't know the answer just yet. We're a little early in our budget process yet.
So what Jenny is struggling with are some of the qualitative issues, and we are quantitative people. I think earlier we said Jack talked about the structural vacancy. Now that's a hard number historically. We can know what was a structural vacancy, how many people were, how many jobs were unfilled, what does it mean to the budget, how was that over the last 3 or 5 years, what does it mean for the budget going forward. That's a quantitative issue. Same with the state championships that Jack mentioned. Wonderful. Okay, we win some, we lose some. So how much money have we spent and what really were the results of all of that? Give me a quantitative analysis so I can deal with it and translate that into what it means for the budget going forward. On the qualitative issue, FNB is not going to win any prizes. I don't think. It's great that if you're gonna have a meeting with the education committee, and I think it's better to have it with them together than each of us. But in the end, we are the quantitative people, so we have to fight back on quantitative issues on the budget and say, give us hard numbers.
The other,
Yes.
yes,
but-
the other, I know that, and Jack, maybe you want to speak to this, but I know that the question Mr. Sini raised had to do more with what Rich Rudel was doing with investments on whatever cash
Oh,
balances
I
he
have
had.
an answer on that. I have an
Okay.
answer. Sorry. I was supposed to write an email on that. So let me.
That's a quantitative question. Is like, okay.
I'll give you the qualitative answer.
Okay.
There are certain bank accounts that are solely Board of Ed bank accounts. During the pandemic for a little bit, the cafeteria funds, which is a separate bank, was in deficit. It's now at about 200,000. And it's not that they overcharge because people are eating eggs and eggs are, like a golden goose costing $12 a dozen. It's just structure and people coming back. They also have the student activity fund. They also have receipt of monies for ELP. And there's a couple other bank accounts that they have. So John Cini rightfully asked, can't the town invest this? So I told Rich that I would speak to Jen and send an email to him, Jen, and Joan saying, can you look at this? I would actually copy Duke and Adley on it, but can you look at this? And then F&B will step away, because we don't need to be involved in that. Prior to having Jen do a fire drill, I thought it might be a good idea to call her and say, yo, Jen, here's the situation, here's the structure. What do you think? Jen's response is, it's not a lot of money. And the amount of cost that would be incurred by her group to try and track it and give it back and other things like that isn't equal to the amount of money that they can possibly earn. So it doesn't make sense for Joan to be investing those funds. All right. That does not preclude Rich from doing a CD or other things like that on his own volition, providing it meets the criteria. And Rich is a smart guy. He can be explained, this is what your limitations are and other things like that. But to have the town do their investments for the limited amount of funds that they have that may come in and come out because of the switch that's going on isn't good. The other thing that is part of that I knew and I asked Jen as well, not knowing what the structure is, but being an old banker, there's transaction fees that are incurred in each of those accounts for deposits, checks written, ACH, and other things like that. That is typically offset by the earnings rate by the on Fed funds of what the bank earns from having a certain balance in those accounts. And so that would have to be analyzed before you even knew what was the available funds for investment. And so I have to write an email back to Rich and Duke on that saying, you guys can do it, but it doesn't make sense for the town. After conversation with Jen, it doesn't make sense for the town to do it, and if they want to invest, then I'm sure that there can be a conversation with Jen and Joan who will tell them what they can and can't do. But, I don't know if they have 200,000 or they have a 500,000, don't know, and what their cash flow is. Part of it was that Rich was saying for the 200,000 that's in the cafeteria funds, they're going to start to use that to replace certain equipment that's antiquated in the cafeterias. So my question is why wasn't some of this antiquated equipment for at least the HHR schools put into the reimbursement state? But maybe some of this can be. I don't know. So that's that's the answer on that.
So
So
you're saying the town doesn't have a centralized cash management? The schools manage their cash separately from the town. That's what you're
it
saying?
sounds that way. Yes, they have their own separate bank accounts.
So they're not pooling their cash to achieve better returns and figure out whose money it is afterwards. I'm amazed. But I know that's going on everywhere because the banks are getting very rich when they pay 2% or 1% and they're lending at 6 and 7. I'm not.
I think that's what
I would have liked to see this better organized. I'm sorry.
I think
That's-
that's what the finance
that's-
committee on the Board of Ed was going to take a look at.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll let them look at it, but it doesn't make sense from the other side. What other? So here's what I'm proposing, and I don't mean to do this. In the past, typically Beth and Peter would do the presentation. I'm going to say you guys split up the second part, but there is a first part of this presentation where I tend to, I'll use the hard word and then I'll soften it after somebody listens to my meeting and says, oh, you can't do that. But we're going to be doing a little bit of chastising of how the Board of Ed's running their business. And if somebody is going to be a jerk and do that, I'm the perfect jerk to do that. And so, we'll all work on that document together and then pass it around. But I'd actually like to deliver the first part saying, here's what we're not seeing from a business perspective. Here's what we want to see. And then when we start talking about the budget and some of the other programs, projects, and other things like that, then, Beth and Peter, you deliver that, which would be part of what our requests are for information and part of our observation. I would suggest that, and I don't want to speak for anyone, but does the majority of our group believe that 5% is too high?
Yeah, I do. I think 5% is too high.
Okay.
Iris, I can't hear you.
Iris, we can't hear you.
That's why I disappeared, because I accidentally clicked leave instead of undo my mic. What did the finance people give them as a guideline for? Don't they every year give them
3.5%.
how much?
3.5% is what Jim mentioned as guidance. I believe 3% on core and 0.5, 50 basis points on growth. Now, I will say something that we did positively is that we do have some of that explained in their presentations of what's core and what's growth. And there are some things that I've agreed with Jen, that if you need to add 6 paras in special ed, even though we're adding people, that's really, we're adding 6 to their core, because their core business is providing those services as required by law. So yes, it's an increase here, and we'll separate that out from the rest of the core, but it is core, not growth. Growth is, though, which they couldn't believe that I was complaining about, the 0.8 FTE by requesting the secretary at Ox Ridge to not work an 11-month year, but work a 12-month year, so that that individual can handle the new ELP that's now at Ox Ridge. And in the past, somebody was doing that at Royal, but that person retired. So it's minimal, a couple of thousand, but that really is growth. So, because that's something new. We're going to put the whole number for the budget for the SSOs and the security, as well as the director of director of mental health, as growth, because it wasn't in the prior year's budget. And Duke understands that. I believe Rich and Adley understand that as well. And so that's not a problem. And Jen concurs with that approach too. So,
Yeah, Jack, I just want to add to your word chastise. I don't know that I don't think that's the right word. I think what the word is, I'm hoping that the feedback, as we're supposed to be representative of the taxpayer, right? And if we're not understanding where they came from and where they're going, because there's not enough projection or pro forma analysis and trajectory that we can point to, saying, okay, this went up 12% this year, and here's why, and this is why we think it's going this way, and this is the goal it's going to achieve in year 5. That's something I can explain to people when I'm walking at the park. and people are like, oh, and then I get, because I get feedback. I get feedback on the budget process. I get feedback from people who are not in the RTM, and it helps me when the Board of Ed can present this information in a way that we can understand it and explain it. That's actually to their benefit because we're the middleman, if you will, to the taxpayers. That's our role, is to convey what's happening and take feedback and give it back up to either Board of Ed or Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen. So this is meant to be um, a collaborative exercise, and these suggestions are meant to actually make their job a little easier. Well, so that there's not unwanted public feedback that might be negative because nobody knew where the stuff came from. So if we have better information, we can explain it better when asked from our constituents. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I talk about this stuff a lot with people.
Jenny, I like how you've positioned it with one exception. I don't think the Board of Ed can explain where they're going either.
Well, these exercises will help them say, this is, you guys have to, this is for not only your benefit, it's really for your benefit.
Yeah,
Like,
I don't understand how you make a business decision without knowing what the financial outcome is, unless you just think that we just keep on adding things and we're going to have people in town that say, we want to be number one in the state and in the world. And, we're going to be the absolute best of everything. And so it's okay to spend this money. And I just think that's irresponsible.
No, no.
Not,
Jack, I
I
agree with you.
thought that Jenny was saying she wants to look into the future. And
yeah.
that's our role, actually. There's nobody better at looking into the future than finance and budget. I really think so. That's our role. Not even the Board of Finance tossing around these numbers. We are concerned about the taxpayer, what's happening in this town in the future. That's our role. So this year is going to be very interesting because a lot of these numbers that we're tossing around were developed in the fall. And I believe strongly, and many economists do too, that we will have a recession in 2023. On July 1, 2023, the new budget kicks in. We may already be in a recession. And we're doing all these things. We say core growth, core budget, growth budget. Some people will come back when we are in a recession and say, I don't buy growth budget. It was nice to have budget, but you should have considered that a nice to have budget is something else if the economy grows or we have a recession. So this growth budget that may not jive with what's going on in the economy come summer. That's something we need to consider, and nobody else more than us. That's my opinion.
So while you're there, I will add something to that, Bert. Beth, Jenny, and I are meeting with Molly Hayes tomorrow at 1 o'clock at Town Hall in room 206 to have a discussion of what F&B is and how it does throughout the year on the budget. You are more than welcome to join us for that, so that there's perspective, because I think you just put it very well. I mean, one of the other things that I'm going to say is that we try, based upon what we follow during the course of the year, that there aren't surprises when the budget is presented. Like, I know that we're like in the town side, I already know that we're going to have another fire marshal because we deferred it before. When they were talking about the rollout of the civilian dispatch, even though it was delayed, we knew what the glide path was, that eventually they're going to have 6, and what that glide path was. So that when we're working, they spent how many hours, or actually behind the scene hours, talking about a $25,000 drone, and who's going to be trained on it, and what other services can use it, and who else needs to be trained on that if they're going to use it here and there. Do we need a second person for a $25,000 drone that we ended up putting in ARPA anyway? So I don't see those same conversations having. But that means that when we come to our budget, I don't think we have a lot of surprises. I kind of figured that this budget was going to be over 4.5%. I said that in our November 30th meeting when Teresa Voigt said something, and I said, you're not going to be happy with where this number is. I knew that in November. And I didn't have the budget. Rich and Adley didn't call me up and say, hey, Jack, we're going to be in this area. It just was anticipation of what's going on. So, but yes, yeah, I agree with you.
Are we taking action tonight on the teacher contracts?
No.
Okay.
There's 2 other things that I just really want to cover. I did cover that we're meeting
The
tomorrow at 1
agenda says
o'clock.
that.
There's if you recall, we had a committee back in 2018, a working group with Jamie on Clock Hill. That has risen its head again to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen has assigned Jay-Z and Mike Burke to get some more financials. I will be speaking to Monica to have some participation from the RTM. Amy Z, whose last name I can never pronounce because my last name is Davis, who's the new chair of the PZNH, who's an extremely qualified individual. I'd like her to participate on that group, and 1 or 2 people from us, because we tend to be more financial in this. But I don't want it coming back to the RTM after they've made decisions without our input up front. So that may be raising its head. We'll look for that. I will send
Jack,
out.
were you in the meeting? Were you in the meeting 2 or 3 years ago when we talked about Clark Hill and Amy Brisanti was there and Jamie was there and all this? So I think we know what's going on, right? I don't know if anything has changed.
What happened is that Jamie asked me to put together a working group, and on that working group,
nothing happened after that, right?
we requested we had Joanne Hennessy and Mike Heitz, myself, a member, Susan Marks from the Board of Selectmen. She was then replaced. Somebody from the Board of Finance, whose name just eludes me, and then he was replaced. And we requested certain information, and we never got it. So we requested on a number of occasions, still didn't get it. So they are now.
I'd be happy to serve on any committee that sorts this out. It is highly complicated, I believe.
I agree, because I've read
the whole
leases.
structure originally didn't make any sense, and it didn't get any better over the years. So, but it really does deserve a look by FNB and other people, because I want to know what's going on with that.
Yes, I would agree with that, and I will mention that. I mean, plus we have in our back pocket, so to say, we do have Jenny, who was the chair of the Darien Housing group at one time, who has great knowledge of this and Chaffer and all this other stuff that goes on there. So yes,
Yeah.
we have resources. So I will approach that. I will send out something for the remaining schedule for the Board of Selectmen. I will be requesting with Bill Smith just what part of the budget everybody wants to look at. The Board of Finance is meeting Thursday where they're going to do some of their assignments. I'm assuming that Jenny, you're already on Park and Rec. And so, we need to divvy up some things and that. If I haven't mentioned it earlier, we're having a new member who unfortunately was unable to come today. That's Malin, with again somebody who has a last name that is just not going to ever come off my tongue. Malin is a former. Do you want to try it, Peter? Since you know how to pronounce it better than I do.
It's not that
It's
hard.
Gasserud.
Gasserud.
All right. Yeah. Okay. It's not
But
Davis. So
then there's only
then,
one A instead of two A's. It's easy.
okay.
Gasserud.
Yeah. I look at the two A's and it just gets me. That was my problem in trying to speak German, Bert, by the way, is that there were too many letters to pronounce. She's a former CDSP chair, budget director, and the former president of the Darien Library. I've worked with her in the past, and it's going to be a great addition to our F&B team. So I'll get that out so people can sign. I am going to suggest that she does not take on the library. Louisa's been doing that with me, and I think that puts her in an awkward position, having been the former president of it.
Can do Bert, did you want to just take a glance at the pension stuff, and we can do bonds again, or all the debt stuff? We can take a look there. I don't think there's much to look at this year.
I will, but not tonight. I mean,
Not
okay.
tonight.
No.
Okay.
Going forward.
Okay. No problem.
Okay.
The market
Iris,
is volatile.
Iris, what did you work on last year? I don't recall. I could look it up, but
Lease, didn't you?
we can't hear you.
You're muted.
Sorry.
Yes, I'm
Please.
ready for anything on bonds, interest rates. I'm ready.
Macroeconomic. It's you.
I think I did general government at
Macroeconomics.
one time.
I can
Okay.
have different opinions on that one.
Okay, and Barry, let me know what you.
And I think I did library with you and Louisa last year too.
I think you did as well. So
Yeah.
Barry, let me know what you did last year and what you want to do. Peter and Beth, if you want to tackle anything on the town side.
Public health and safety.
We only have
The public works.
12 people, but
I was on Park and Rec with Jenny.
yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
We can do that
That's
again.
right. Yeah, let's do that again.
And then, there's a lot going on in public works, so maybe some of the new people want to take some of that on.
I could go to public works. I was on that committee for a year. Before I came to F&B. So whatever, put me wherever you think I need.
If we have Great Island coming on, maybe that will be a.
Are we going to ever get any more information about what's going on? Why is that so secretive?
I think they're still in contract negotiations.
Yeah, I also think that if it is anything that could have to do with environmental or anything that might have to do with the access into it, the road, or any of those other things, we would not want certain things in the public domain while we're negotiating.
Yeah, Jack,
negotiate in private.
Yeah, I have to jump in here because I wanted to raise this actually with Wayne at some point. When you have a land transaction, environmental issues are a matter of you are legally required to disclose those. I don't understand why people are saying there's confidential information regarding environmental issues. I just don't get it. And we've all bought and sold houses. We've
Yeah,
had
everybody's got to dig up their
darn
oil
oil
tank
tanks.
or it, like it's, I
Yeah,
had to,
I don't. I've been silent on this for too long. I don't understand it. I'm not going to get. I've been privy to information in executive session. I will maintain that confidence, but I don't understand why these things aren't being disclosed to us on the RTM as all of it. I just
I,
don't. I mean, it's a
I'm also
business deal.
concerned. Peter, I'm kind of agree with you. I'm concerned that because we don't know what's going on, does it change the parameters of why we agreed to vote to spend the money?
Yes,
And I think that that's part of why the RTM should be informed on some stuff, because I think that, you know, people who, whichever side of the fence they were on, would be like, well, is this changed my mind about why I want to spend the money? Maybe I don't want us to go down that road to have to fix all this, depending on what we negotiate, or why. I just, it's making me a little queasy about how we don't have any information, because
Iris. It's
it
one of
is
the
a
reasons why I voted no.
it's a public transaction.
Yeah, well, I think that this is a committee that just doesn't talk about transparency. We actually are a transparent committee. Maybe a little bit too much so, since I've been called into the principal's office on a number of occasions, even the new principal's office. Um, then,
Sorry.
yeah,
No.
but that was something I had when I was a kid, so I know how to handle that. Um, just it is what it is. Um, the so here's what I'd like to do. As quickly as we can, let's get information, because Peter, Beth, and I are going to have to put something together. Jenny, you're more than welcome to help us. Put something together so we can then distribute it for your review of the membership. Um, let's put together any questions we have on the budget. Iris, you were talking about some of them and how they relate to the budget, and you were trying to figure that out. Let's put it down. One of the questions I want to ask them, which is not meant to rattle cages, but just to have an understanding, is not all towns have approved their teachers' budget this year. Some have voted to reject. So I actually know which ones they are. I'm not mentioning it now.
Is it a vote to reject or a vote to not approve? There's
It's
a
a
difference.
vote to not reject.
Not reject.
All right. But there's at least two that I know that actually voted to reject, which meant
And do you know
they
why they
went.
voted? What the rationale for that was?
I can find out from one of them, because
That would
I have
be
a
interesting.
I have a friend who serves in that government legislative body, a very close friend. Um, so, and I'm not saying that we should, but I just want to understand what happens if that ever happens. Over
My
the years,
understanding
I've
is that
been.
we go to arbitration afterwards, and if we did that, I think we'd be in a position potentially to lose big.
Well, that's what I've heard, and I understand that it's sort of like a column A and a column B, that the town puts down, or the Board of Ed puts down its position on this stuff. The union puts down its position on this stuff. They can bring in new stuff. And the arbitrator doesn't look to be King Solomon, down the middle. He either picks from column A or column B. So I think it's worthwhile to have a legal understanding of that. So during our presentation, we can make sure that we're presenting it with accuracy.
And
I
it may be
can't,
that those towns that are rejecting it's for rationales that have nothing to do relatable to our contract. We can't.
one of the towns, without giving its name, is an extremely, we're not even in their class of wealth. So that should be a hint of who did it.
I don't care if you do. I just care why they think that.
That's what I'm going to find out. I'm going to find out what
and
it
if
was.
if it relates to anything that's in our contract, and if it doesn't, then it's not.
Right.
That's their business and not ours.
There really wasn't significant. When I'm looking at this, all right, from my review of the contract, and we have the contract so we can bore ourselves to death reading it. But when I'm looking at it overall, it helps putting on my glasses. There really isn't anything really significant. I mean, there's no change in healthcare sharing this year, but it goes up to 23%, which is consistent with other communities. The stipends are going up by 2.5%. That they did do an extension on maternity leave or parental leave, which, having several grandchildren here, I know that my family has greatly appreciated those when they had that, to have both maternal and paternal coverage of those young kids. So the thing is the cost. And
Yeah, I mean, the rest of the contract was pretty cut and dried. There were there. I mean, it was not.
No,
I didn't see anything that I thought was a big deal. It's just the schedule with the change in compensation.
it's significant.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it had to be because even if we're paying more, people are choosing not to come here anymore. I mean, I listened to last night. Um, is Barry Palmer the union rep by any chance? Because he spoke at the end of last night's Board of Ed meeting, and he said that his experience has been overall good with Darien parents, but when he said, and he left a 10-year position to come to Darien, people were warning him about Darien parents, and I just sort of chuckled in the background because participating in the superintendent search with some of these focus groups, and I don't even recall which superintendent we were looking for when, but it may have been when we were looking for Hadley, who knows. But I said one of the strengths of the Darien school systems are the Darien parents. I said, and one of the weaknesses of the Darien school system are the Darien parents. So, and being that this group was out of Scarsdale, some of them, the gentleman laughed and said, I fully understand exactly what that comment is, because it's similar there. A high performance town has things in both ways.
Yeah.
But
Well, I will
yes, if
say I understand why they had the compensation on the contract is higher. I mean, my eighth graders had 3 science teachers this year, and it's only January.
wow,
Jack, the
that
town.
talks.
Jack, the town has. I confess that this is not scientific, and it is anecdotal, but I've heard more than one person discuss that we don't pay our teachers enough money to keep good teachers, and there are a lot of vacancies, and there's a reason for that. I mean, I know you sort of poo-pooed this whole argument, but our school is the top school in the state. That's because we have great teachers, and I think they should be paid accordingly. In some ways, rewarded for how well our school system is doing.
I agree with that concept. And again, my youngest is 30 years old. Um, but I recall one time saying when my kids were in middle school, and Barry may recall this at the same time since we had some similar age kids. Friday, there were several teachers that had tutoring on a Friday morning because that Friday they were going to be giving a test. So these teachers were in. Also at the high school, there were a math teacher that did an accommodation for my younger daughter. And when we're in her PPT, he happened to mention that to us. And my wife and I didn't have any knowledge. And that was because he told my daughter not to tell anyone, and she didn't understand that that was not to tell anybody else, but you can tell your parents that this is what I'm doing to help you out here. Um, but yes, I would agree that we've had some really excellent teachers over the years. Um,
And just to, given the high profile nature of town spending over the last 7 to 8, 9, 10 months, I think that if we landed up in binding arbitration, we're going to lose big because it's really hard to cry poor and say we can't afford this when we just blew $100 million on a park. And I love parks. But this is one of the reasons. Again, one of the reasons why I did not vote for it. As much as I wanted the darn park, because I believe in the outdoors. I believe in open spaces. But as my late mother would say, sure as God made little green apples, that this purchase would manifest us ways that nobody forecast or looked forward to, since that's one of the themes of the evening is forecasting. I could have told you last spring. I didn't want to say it in the middle of the meeting because I think people would have objected to it and said I was being alarmist. But again, not just a teacher's contract, any labor contract going to arbitration is going to have Great Island rammed down our throat.
yeah, that and I've always taken that position also that I'm going to call it the group of 20 towns that were identified for Malloy based upon their wealth. um, that when they go to arbitration, they don't do well. The only thing that was the change was Ridgefield going to a PPT in medical expenses, that once they won in arbitration, everybody else was able to move there. So, but that's the only thing on healthcare that was done. Um, that being said, please look at the contract. Um, Forward any comments or questions to Peter, Beth, and myself so we can organize them and we can forward them to which call it to Duke and Natalie. I'll also be copying Ed Shecker so that he sees what questions we're asking as well.
Jack?
Yeah.
Jack, my biggest concern on the contract is I'd like to hear from somebody on the Board of Ed or the administration. They go through a lot of work getting to these contracts, and I was hoping that tonight we would hear from somebody.
So was I, which is why we are deferring our meeting and full discussion on it until the 18th, because we have the first part is on the police contract between 7:30 and 8. So we'll have one Zoom meeting on that. But then we have another go-to meeting starting at 8 o'clock, which will be joint with the RTM Education Committee. And then we were asked to sort of consolidate, and I have no problems with joint meetings, especially on this. Um, so we're going to have members of that group there. I'm also going to I'm going to go to tomorrow's meeting, and it's probably worthwhile to listen to the Board of Finances meeting tomorrow, because they're going to be discussing the police contract, but they will also be discussing the teacher's contract, even though they do not vote on it. And Jim Palin was a participating member of the negotiation team. In other words, he provided information. So I not only want to hear from the administration and on this contract without it, but I also want to hear from Jim on his perspective of it. So
Jack, I have a
Just wanna-
question on the agenda tonight. How do we want to handle, because all these, I think we were supposed to, it says discuss and take action on teacher's contract, discuss and take action on Board of Ed budget, comments to Board of Ed, because this ended up being more of a working group. Just do
we are
need to
deferring.
do we need to amend the agenda?
No, we're
To
just
no,
going to defer action on the
defer action.
contract until the 18th.
Okay,
And we're going to work on what the comments are and pass it around and then request that any editorial changes or tenor changes to that discussion be sent to Peter, Beth, and myself.
okay.
I'd like to just amplify Jenny's comments about perhaps we frame this as a vision looking forward and the benefits of such a vision that we've been discussing tonight.
I thought that was a good meeting. And even if you don't take a vote, it can be a good meeting once we put down in writing what we discussed.
Well, I actually copied one of your words, and there's something Jen Chinesky mentioned to me earlier today, where I'm going to have to go back, bug her, and say, what were those exact words you said to me? Because I didn't have a pencil available. But I like your term structural vacancies. I think that's I think that's a very solid quantitative term. I think that describes it better than I attempted to on that. I will tell you, which will rattle some people. I think I went. I don't know. Did I go over it with you, Beth, or with you, Jenny? On the back of an envelope, I sat down and went through about 5 or 6 items, at which didn't necessarily eliminate anything that was educationally instructionally oriented, just accounted for structural vacancies, talked about the budget control, talked about pre-buying certain technology, talked about certain items that have already been raised by the Board of Ed, and I got back down to a 3.98 budget increase. So, which is a little more palatable. And with the understanding, if they run into a deficit, John Senius mentioned that. During COVID, they had a $2 million deficit. Eventually, they came to the RTM and the Board of Finance, and we took care of it. So there has to be, and John mentioned it, Sini. I believe there's a trust in how F&B has been working with the Board of Ed and with Duke Deneen and Dr. Adley. And I think there's a trust with how the Board of Finance has been working with them as well. So, I can't speak on education, but at least between those 2 points, I think there's a trust here that says, look, we want to get this budget down. We believe you, even with that, you still have enough flexibility to operate your organization. And if by some chance we were a little bit overly aggressive, we'll cover you. And I actually said that in the meeting. I said, look, I can speak for F&B. If I want you to be overly aggressive. And if that resulted in you having a need for extra cash, I can speak for F&B. We're not going to say no.
And we got plenty of extra cash in excess fund balance.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm tired of this money going into the fund balance. All right. And then we can only use it really for capital. Because if we use it for capital and we zero out capital, if there is a project that you might not agree with on the capital side, it really doesn't matter because then it has no effect on the because we paid for it out of cash from prior years overage. And that's not how I don't think that's good budgeting for the town side.
I
So
think what Jack is saying when he says trust, I don't think anybody's playing games. I really don't think so.
no.
And that's a great thing. Okay, in budget, it's very easy to play games. And I had some items in the budget. Everyone knows which one I mean. Um, where I thought there were games being played. I think this year, um, everyone is not playing games. Everyone is really sitting down and seeing what it's all about. And even if we have differences, I think people are very reasonable about the discussions. It's a great process. Um, and I don't think the numbers that we hear right now, well, I shouldn't even talk about that. It's too early. But numbers are going up everywhere. Okay. It's inflation. So if anything can be done reasonably for the town and F&B can have part of it, what a wonderful thing. Thank you, guys.
No, I agree with you, Bert. So is there anything else we want to talk about, or have we covered everything other than the fact that I absolutely missed
We
the
can vote on the minutes.
baseball championship and then happened to look at what it was. And I'm glad I didn't see, since both of my Big Ten teams didn't make it. I'm absolutely thrilled to death that I didn't watch a 62 to like 0 game.
We have minutes to approve, as Barry said.
Thank
Oh,
you.
yes. Okay, thank you.
So it's an official meeting.
Jenny, this
We
is
can
your
take a
thing.
vote.
I'm sorry, Barry, you said something?
It's an
Yeah,
official
let's,
meeting. We can take a vote.
yeah.
Hope everybody had a chance to, I tried to streamline them now that I know that
Mhm.
other boards are streamlining their minutes even more. So if you needed, there's comments that you want me to add in, let me know. If not, I have a link to the video, I think, in the, so members of the public can always watch it. So does anybody
Um,
have any questions or comments?
I need to move
Nobody?
to that.
Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from the December 5th meeting?
Barry moves, Iris seconds.
Barry moves. Okay. All in
All in
favor, I
favor?
guess. There we
It's
go.
unanimous.
Unanimous. There's 7 of us.
Yep. So
Okay.
now we'll come back to me. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Peter nodded, so I'll give him Peter, and I'll give Beth on the other side.
Perfect.
All those in favor, thank you all. I do agree with
Right.
Bert. This was a good conversation.
Yeah.